welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am back. You will have missed my dulcet tones last week, which were not in fine health. I was knocked down by some weird virus or other. But thankfully, I am back to near full match fitness. Yeah, it's good to be back, guys. Alan, how you doing?
Yeah, very good. It's a good week, isn't it? Can have fun this week. You don't have to play catch up. There's no midweek game, so we can just focus all the writing attention on one thing, which is great.
Yeah, no, it was a great weekend. My favourite meme of the moment is the little baby going to touch the League Cup and then being told by their mum no and starting crying and everybody saying that that's Philip Clement. That's my particular favourite. James, how are you doing?
I'm scared. We have. I don't know if it's the disease that you had, that these drones that are flying all over the East Coast. I don't know if you guys have seen this in the news, but the U.S. is all a flutter of what's going on in our skies with unidentified flying objects that the government's not telling us about. So it's bringing out all of us wackos that have conspiracy theories about the Iranians and all kinds of other fun things. Or possibly, quite plausibly, the U.S. Defense Department, but we shall see.
Some of the right-wing nut job. That's normal, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, it might just be Disney testing a new drone show for Disney World. I don't know.
Elon Musk and his new Tesla.
Could be low-flying Starlink. Who knows?
Or Amazon packages getting delivered. I don't know.
Yes, it's turning into a kerfuffle.
Yes, who knows? One thing's for sure. Yeah, well, the only thing that will endanger those is any shots from Ryan Christie, that's for sure. Let's get into it. Obviously, we have won a trophy. It was a bit of a battle in the end. James, I'll come to you first. Overall thoughts of the game on Sunday?
Yeah, exhausting. Thank God. That's the summary. It was quite the experience. Reminded partly of the 3-3 at Ibrox, I thought, last March. Kind of had some of that ups and downs, and then sprinkle in some of the Aberdeen semifinal from April last season, and you get to kind of the mix of what the roller coaster ride was. But selfishly, from an analytical perspective, it's kind of a fascinating game to analyze, because I think you had two managers pretty well prepared and actually impacted the game. It seemed to me anyway, and how they set things up, and our manager responding and making some tweaks, and then Clement counter tweaking. And it was just a very interesting game tactically. And so thankfully we came out on the correct side of it, so that we can analyze these things from a joyous perspective. Would not have been quite as fun had the alternative occurred, but yeah, very fascinating game.
Yeah, Alan, very much a game of two halves. I think, if that cliche holds any water, as we all know, they're based in truth, but certainly that applies to this game.
I feel like there's about 8 halves, to be honest with you. So it probably won't surprise people to know that I'm not one of these supporters that sits there and watches a game and I'm jumping up and down singing songs, and I tend to sit there in silence, and I think when people are under stress, right, they default to their kind of what is their, wherever they are on any sort of spectrum. That's what they'll default to under stress. So I'm fairly introverted. So I sit there like this. So my daughter was sat with me. She's got looking at me. Are you all right, Dad? Sort of thing. Just getting more and more and more tense and quieter as the game's going on. I remember feeling exactly like this during the 3-3 with Hearts in that Scottish Cup final. It was like a terrible display of football against a championship team, wasn't it, at the time, Hearts? And I was very much like that. I mean, it's great to look back on it now with having won the trophy and being sort of all joyous about it, but I can honestly say, and I actually you almost feel like cheated a little bit, in the sense of, if I was watching this as a neutral, if this had been, I don't know, Newcastle against Sunderland or something in the League Cup final in England, I just thought, this is great. This is what a laugh. This is what fun. What jolly japes this is. But because it's your own team, I had no enjoyment from watching the actual game at all. That's how tense it was until just the very, very end. So anyway, just thought I'd share that with you. But we'll get into the proper stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah, Alan, I don't think you and I would get along watching a game in the same room together, because I am the exact opposite of everything you just described there. But yeah, I'm up and down and roundabout and everything in between. But, you know, each to their own. A club open to all, as they say. James, I guess the first place we should start is the run up to the game. We've been kind of up and down form wise. We've had some injuries come into the situation. Rangers came off the back of what I thought was actually a very decent performance against Tottenham, regardless of what you think about how Tottenham performed. Is there an element of this, the writing was on the wall, that this was going to be the kind of final that it turned out to be?
Yeah, I did expect it to be close. I thought that with Clement kind of catching his footing, shall we say, tactically it seemed, and some of their players coming back to fitness, and then bringing Haji back into kind of the loop from Siberia or wherever the heck he had been, they were significantly better than they had reflected in the season up until like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I thought right, that's right. So I was concerned that if Clement came into the game with a competent, meaning that if he had just watched our last 4 or 5 games, it should smack him upside the head where our vulnerabilities were, and that if he approached the game competently with a decent tactical plan, that they were probably going to cause us some problems. And that's kind of how it played out. I think that's what the first half was about, is they kind of had a hybrid approach of what they do, with a little bit of Bruges sprinkled in, with a little bit of Zagreb sprinkled in. And it was a pretty smart tactical setup, I thought, given our personnel. And we just had a lot of problems with it, other than the balls over the top in behind, which, you know, that's our forte right now. I mean, we've got that front three that are lightning fast, and on occasion some of our guys from deep can deliver those balls. So that was kind of really our major threat in the first half, was trying to get those balls in behind. But trying to play through their lines and building up was very difficult, and that has emerged as quite the challenge for us in the last, I'll say, 4 to 6 weeks, as teams are starting to set up to basically challenge us to try and do it, and let our center backs have the ball and say, go ahead and do something with it, because it wasn't happening very often when they did. Then we'll get into the second half, but that's kind of what I thought was the main issue heading into the game, is that there was clear evidence, and Clement, again, to his credit, was competent enough to recognize it and deploy it.
Yeah, but certainly we had problems getting forward. Alan, we also had vulnerabilities at the back. We obviously conceded 3 goals against a team that, you know, throughout the season have struggled to create chances and score goals. What about their approach, or maybe more pertinently, what about our setup, left us so vulnerable to conceding the goals that we did?
I think it's as James said. You know, if you'd watched any of our last 3 or 4 games, but especially against Bruges, to a certain extent against Aberdeen, and certainly against Zagreb, you know, that sort of very compact mid-block with very aggressive pressing anywhere near another side of the halfway line, has kind of successfully stopped Celtic a lot of build-up, being sort of fluid. But even then, and you know, they were ready. They were waiting for that short pass in midfield. They were waiting for Taylor to come in and play a square ball, and you know, and that was fine. And that they did a really good job at that. But even at that, I felt by the first 5 minutes, right, were just the usual chaos. Right, there was 7 packing turnovers by both sides in the first 5-10 minutes. Right, so that was just kind of carnage on, and then it settled down. And I actually felt, you know, Actually, McGregor got more on the ball in the first 10 minutes than he did proportionally the rest of the game. So if Barami was supposed to be man marking him, he didn't do a very good job. He improved as the game went on, I think, in that regard. But it didn't start well. And from around the 15-minute mark, Celtic 3 times played balls over the top and got Kuhn away once, got Kyogo in once, and that was the way to do it. That was the way to beat. You're playing a team that's got a very compact mid-block. You've got 3 relatively slow defenders and 1 who's quick but not necessarily positionally disciplined. And that's exactly how we should have been playing against them. You either go round or you go over, right? I think you have 2 options in playing that kind of setup. And I thought by 20 minutes, I was kind of on the rewatch. It looked like we were reasonably comfortable in the game. We'd settled into the game, which we'd kind of shown them that we could go over the top of them. Whenever they got the ball, they were just launching it straight up front and hoping to either win a throw-in or a second ball, or what have you. They were terrible on the ball, actually. A better team like a Bruges would have been more problematic. It kind of never got any better than that. I don't think in that first half, and then I think what happened is some of the risks that we took into the game added to some that manifest that I didn't particularly expect. So, for example, Trusty, who's been in Europe, who's been in all the games really, very, very solid, very, very steady, good pace, good strength, a very good one-on-one defender, good, decent in the air, not dominating, but good in the air, and safe enough with his passing without being particularly exceptional. He just looked like a bag of nerves. I mean, his passing was all over the place. I mean, he was either hammering the ball at people, or he was not hitting it hard enough, which is just classic signs of a player under stress. His first cup final, wet and windy day, all of the things that go with it. It's probably his first derby as well, I think, isn't it? So I think he suffered badly from nerves, frankly. And when we come to the substitution at half time, was it the right call? Well, Trusty had made 1 pack pass, right? So the Celtic centre backs overwhelmingly get possession of the football, and if one of them isn't bypassing anybody at any point, that's a problem. And I think that's what Rodgers saw. And then you had Greg Taylor, who we talked about. He's in this seemingly no man's land in terms of his contract situation, and he played like somebody who has got the weight of the world on his shoulders, just making basic mistakes, giving the ball away in terrible situations, which again is something that you do through stress. And then the third thing was you've got 2 midfielders that we can't seem to get on the ball, or if they do get on the ball, Bernardo's first inclination is just to send the ball back again. And Hatate, his first 3 times he got the ball in the first 4 minutes, he lost possession. And it wasn't because he was trying to do something brilliant. It was once he got bullied, he just got brushed off the ball because he's not physically very strong. And the other 2 times, it was just lack of concentration, lack of focus, call it what you want, laziness, indiscipline, just not concentrating. So, you add all those things together and then, bad things can happen, which is what happened in the sort of 41st minute. But up till then, I thought we were kind of comfortable in the game, and we'd shown that we could go over. I thought Carter Vickers was doing a good job of going down the side. At least on the right-hand side, we were going down the sides. Nothing much was happening on the left. But then bad things happened, and we went a goal down. So, and then obviously they get a lift from that. But if you look at the stats at half time, where packing scores are almost identical. 3 shots to 6. I think we've got 0.15 xG. They had 0.73. So they've edged it fair enough. Each keeper's made 2 saves. Each team's had 6 possessions in the box. It's a coin flip game at that point. As I say, on the rewatch, at 20-25 minutes, I was comfortable, and I thought, there's actually we've got a way forward here, but we couldn't execute it. As I say, I think that left hand side was just a real issue for us in terms of progressing the ball. So that was the kind of first half for me. So do you want to go back to James for the second?
Yeah, James, a lot of interesting points brought up there from Alan. He's statistically proved what you said about Rangers saying to us, let the centre halves have the ball and see what they can do with it. it proved that, with our inability to provide more than one pack pass early on in the game, from there that was obviously an issue. Greg Taylor and Rio Hatate, we could talk about till the cows come home. I guess there's a question I want to ask, and you can maybe take this into the second half analysis as well, of, how often do we say about Greg Taylor specifically that he's good enough domestically but maybe not in Europe? Because sometimes we still see that he's not good enough domestically either. How often do we say about Rio Hatate, yeah, he's not always on his game, but when he's on his game, he's great? Like, how often can we excuse these kind of performances when they do seem to really hamper our progression in big games like this?
Well, I wrote recently, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that I think our recruitment has manifested in the island of misfit toys, meaning that our players have distinct strengths and weaknesses, but when you get them in certain combinations, and we don't, it's almost like we have a gut shot straight draw to try and get a good hand dealt from a selection perspective, because there's so many kind of idiosyncratic issues. And, for example, with Taylor, my preference was to start him over Valle going into the game, because generally speaking, he's a little bit better on the ball, particularly in that inverted role. He's less apt to have a brain fart. At least that's been my assessment of Valle. But it's an imperfect solution. As I said on the preview last week with Patrick Kasky, it's like, that doesn't mean he's not going to screw up royally. It's just that on the margin, he's probably a better option than Valle. So this is the issue, is we brought in this guy from Barcelona who you would think, coming from Barcelona, would be a magical left back on the ball. And in fact, one of his main problems is doing exactly what Taylor did. Meaning giving away kind of a knucklehead pass in a dangerous place when, it's very unfortunate. So I just think that we have a lot of guys who have some of these issues in how they play and where their weaknesses lie. Like Alan said, relative to Bernardo, getting into space. I mean, it's such an obvious. This was not Joe Aribo, Glenn Kamara, and Calvin Bassey man marking our players, right? Those guys were and are like high end physical specimens and athletes that would, shut down Tom Rogic in a derby. And when they were playing the kind of the jump out role like Bassey used to do, as now, I mean, this is proper. This guy is not, I might be quicker than proper. And their midfield's like, okay, but not, nothing where you would say physically they're scary in any kind of sense. They're competent, but not where you would say, man, they should be able to just completely man mark out our two attacking eights to the point where they're almost ghosts. And that's kind of what happened. Now they tired, and there was a cost to that later in the game. But, this is where we have a lot of kind of noble, obvious weaknesses that teams can game plan around now. And, the level of managing in Scotland generally is bad enough that we'll still get our fair share of Hibs that do not, and apparently don't look at the teams they're playing and what their vulnerabilities are. But yeah, it was those kind of manifestations of some of these individual weaknesses, when you put them together, build out and connecting kind of defense up to the forward line. This is why, other than those balls in behind, Kyogo's almost become a ghost as well, because there's no one there to connect with him. Matt O'Reilly's not there anymore. Aaron Moy's not there anymore. I'm like, there's no one who's in the middle there, kind of getting into space and moving the ball centrally, or getting into those triangles even wide. Do
you know the only one who does that? The only one who does that is Luke McCown when he's on.
He's shown some of that. That's right. So yeah, but again, all of that being said, I wrote something on Monday as we kind of segue into the second half, which is we did look to make a material shift. Obviously, the substitution with Scales coming in for Trusty. My lament when we signed Trusty is that he wasn't a clear and obvious upgrade over Scales based on my assessment, and that the big issue was him on the ball, his passing acumen. He was probably fat. I shouldn't say probably. He looks objectively faster than Scales, but that, I would like to think that we could upgrade on Liam Scales on the ball at left center back, particularly when we're paying £6 million. I didn't think we did that. I thought this game kind of reflected that pushed. They're like in the same neighborhood of each other. So I'm not being critical of either. It's just I didn't think Trusty was, a clear and obvious upgrade. But the other tactical tweak that appeared to me is that instead of having the two center backs kind of split and a lot of distance in between them, with the fullbacks kind of high up, or I should say that the opposite fullback, meaning Alistair Johnson in particular, with Taylor inverted, we kind of dropped Alistair Johnson a good bit, and then subsequently Tony Ralston when he came in to almost, I called it it's kind of the Lustig role, where we used to have in Rodgers' first tenure, where you'd have the 3-2-5 kind of setup. And we kind of went to that to a degree, with Hatate dropping in a little bit, and you had three at the back, and that created different angles, a little bit more robustness in defense. When we did turn the ball over, then we had those three kind of defenders sitting there in more of an equal distribution across the back line. And I thought that helped until Rangers adjusted. Again, it took them a good 10 to 15 minutes until Clement then said, okay. But by then we had scored a couple of times. And then that's when he really went full throttle more on the forward press. And some of that was probably game state, meaning that they were then down a goal. But that also then opened them up for the counter, right? So you had this kind of first half where they came out, we struggled. And when I say struggle, meaning that sometimes a strategy is to let your opponent hang themselves, right? That if they're not good at something, force them to do it as much as possible. And that's kind of what I saw the game strategy as being for Rangers going into the first half. So it's a question of timing, and if they could, have us make mistakes before they conceded something over the top, like that was the chess match that was unfolding. But in that second half, then you had a reaction, a counter reaction, and then it started to move in our direction because it started to open up then. And then that's when our speed and our quality started to take over a little bit. But having said that, we always go back to it's just about sequencing and variance. I mean, if Igamani is not a numbskull with his decision making, which he has been, like that's a determinable weakness that he's had, and just slips the ball over to three guys running into a clear goal, we would have been down 2-0 or likely down 2-0, and then who knows how the game would have played out. But the way it did, I mean, I give Rodgers and the coaching staff some credit for making those tweaks, because it did seem to shift and force Rangers into another change. It kind of pulled them out of what had been so successful, and that started to create a lot more space for our guys to move around, and then they tired, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Alan, I'll come back to you on that assessment from James of how we kind of opened them up in the second half. I appreciate what he's saying. I have to say that my much more simplistic view of watching the second half was that we do have a bit of an over-reliance on moments of magic from players like Kuhn, from players like Maeda, who can pull something out of nowhere sometimes. Am I being too simplistic? Is there more to it, as James says, in terms of how we managed to break them down in that second half to get back into the game?
As I said, if you're going to play against this compact mid-block that aggressively presses you, one, you should keep the ball, and as James says, basically play. Let the strength, their own strength, tire them out. Essentially, just let them run, because players like Bayrami, Hadji. These sort of players are not renowned for their fortitude and their bravery in terms of putting in a shift for 90 minutes without the ball, right? These are kind of more players that want to be on the ball all the time, so make them run about for as long as you can. But that involves keeping the ball a bit better. But anyway, as I said, they go over the top, we go around the sides. So what the introduction of scales allowed the team to do was to go down the left-hand side as well as the right-hand side. But you're right in what you say, and as I say, so Trusty one pack pass in the whole 45 minutes he was on. Scales managed 9 actually in the time that he was on, which is the second highest in the game. Guess who had the highest? You're on mute.
Yeah, was that Carter Vickers?
Yeah, so the second highest number of pack passes was 9. Guess how many Carter Vickers? Well, you know, James, because you've seen the stat pack. But anyway, I'm not prolonging the agony. 24, right? So I forgot to mention, and we were talking about risk piled upon risk, right? So you've got Taylor head, clearly not where it should be, because every game now he's making bad errors that we don't normally. So we didn't see in the beginning of the season. We saw kind of very focused, very tight kind of Greg Taylor. We're not seeing that now. Trusty, bag of nerves, and then Alistair Johnson. Right, what a nightmare! What an absolute nightmare of a game in terms of turnovers. The guy clearly wasn't fit. He shouldn't have played. He wasn't fit. He was struggling. He wasn't really getting forward that much. He was hampered. So Carter Vickers has got all this to sort out, right? I mean, the guy was to me, he was just absolutely immense, really. I mean, just ridiculously so. 24 pack passes. The next highest was 9, and then it was 8 by McGregor. That's over 120 minutes, right? So, yes, you're right to an extent. So we couldn't go down the middle because we don't have players in midfield that we can reliably, like Matt O'Reilly. Think of Tom Rogic. The classic Carter Vickers to Rogic ball in the inside right channel. Rogic receiving the ball already on the half turn, square on to the pitch, and therefore can go forward, can go sideways, can go back. Basic body shape, strength as well, and technique. Right, you need all those things. Hatate hasn't got the strength. Bernardo always seems to be facing the wrong way. And Engels is just not used to playing that. He's used to playing in a deeper role. And you saw when he came on, he's used to banging balls down the channels or banging balls over the top. He's not used to getting the ball under pressure on the half turn and playing little triangle passes with your fullback and your winger. And he's going to have to learn pretty quick. So the midfield are giving us nothing, next to nothing in terms of progressing the ball through the centre. So we go down the wings. And it's no surprise when you see, the scoring contributions this season. Kun, Maeda, way out in front, and then Kyogo kind of just about keeping in double figures, and then it's not many. Ida, I think, is next, right? So we're just not getting, like you say, the contribution, the scoring contributions from the central midfielders. I mean, Engels, an absolutely amazing assist. I mean, that really showed real composure there because, as I said to you before, James, for his raw and his ill-fitting to how Celtic play as he is, he always manages to do something in a game that has an impact. But Engels came on, and he gave away the ball 19 times. 19 passes went astray. I mean, that's just a phenomenal. And he was a substitute. He wasn't even on the whole game, right? That's just absolutely phenomenal. And Bernardo. So when Bernardo went off, right? Because I wrote this down in my notes that I take when I'm watching the game. I just have struggling to. So when 70 minutes, Bernardo went off, right? Bernardo's packing score was 101 and Hatate's was 33. They both have the same expected scoring contribution. Bernardo's defensive action success rate was 71%, Hatate's was 40%. That made no sense to me. If you just looked at those, that sort of covered creativity, goal threat, and defensive actions. Very highly aggregated numbers, but they're good. They're good metrics. These are pretty predictive. I would argue. So that made no sense to me, right? And I think Hatate actually got better as the game went on, which is great. And so maybe Rodgers does know more than I do, of course. But it made no sense to me, that substitution at that time, given the relative performances of the team. What I think happened, and I think I'm sensing that Rodgers does this sometimes, and I think all managers do, is if at around about the time that a manager's thinking of a change, somebody does something stupid, it kind of makes the manager's mind up for him. So Bernardo got the ball wide right, and he was under pressure and he was near the touchline. And rather than just take a challenge and maybe win a throw-in, or go backwards. He kind of hooked the ball over his head into the middle of the pitch. Didn't have a clue what was behind him. Gave the ball away, and they had a chance to break. I don't think it came to anything. But I mean, that's the sort of thing that a manager looks at and goes, "Oh, that is like, you just don't do that." And Bernardo did that just before he was hooked. Now, I'm sure a lot more planning went into the substitution, and maybe through their monitors that they wear, that Bernardo was tiring more than Hatate. That may well have been the case, but that made no sense to me. But either which way, whichever of those three you had on in the 8 positions, we're simply not getting enough to build the play through the centre of the pitch. This is becoming a major issue. So to your point, yes, we're totally reliant on Maeda and Kuhn in association with the fullbacks, and especially Alistair Johnson when he's fit, right, in providing threat from wide areas, because we're just not getting it, from that central areas, especially when teams set up the way that they did on Sunday. That is a real issue.
It is indeed, especially if Kuhn or Maeda Touchwood suffer an injury. I don't know how we're going to cope with that. But speaking of which, James, just as Alan was talking there and breaking things down, I was looking ahead to the festive period. And as I was scrolling, I was going, right, that's a game every 3 days. How long does that go on for? I've got to the 1st of February. And that includes the 2 Champions League matches against Young Boys and Aston Villa.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about the festive period being a busy period, but essentially we've got this busy period up to the end of January. How do we navigate this in terms of keeping a strong enough lineup going on into these games, but not sacrificing player burnout or injury risk or anything like that? Because we've seen already this season, players like McGregor are needing a little bit more rest. Players like Bernardo have proved they can't, repeatedly play week in, week out, or even every few days as is required. Is it just going to be a case of mixing and matching over this next month, or is there going to have to be a little bit more strength, maybe in depth, added in January to get us through this period?
It's funny you said that, because I did the exact same exercise, because without the winter break, it's kind of a little bit new, because I was thinking the same thing. I was like, oh, well, January will let up a little bit. No, especially with the cup draw that we got. I mean, it's at home, but it's Kilmarnock. I mean, we didn't even get a lower league club in the first round that we're in the Scottish Cup. So, yeah, it's actually, I think it's 13 matches over 41 days. I did this. I might have screwed up that math a little bit on the days, but I'm so that's like average of 3.15, almost pi in our average number of days for between games. Yeah, so it's going to be a big issue potentially, but again, all of the teams are. So one would think, given our resources, squad size, depth, and quality, that we should be able to persist. But some of that gets into luck. We're entering that period of horrible weather, and to Alan's point, just going over it, I think we are extra super duper vulnerable to a couple of guys getting injured, and I think Kuhn is the big one, not even so Maeda. I mean, as terrific as Maeda was and is in these European level games because of his superpowers that he has, they get dulled quite a bit at Ross County in frickin' January. Those kind of games where he can still do some things, but on the margin, he's not quite as useful with those superpowers. But to me, it's Kuhn, Kyogo. The risk of losing Kyogo theoretically, possibly in January, if a fifth place team that's losing a lot in the English Premier League decides to make a move. That those kind of things would theoretically could happen. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but these kinds of things can happen. And I worry about our depth in those areas because of the reliance that we have on these people. I don't think the calculation in midfield is going to change materially. I think McCallum can help in that regard. But with rotation, we're just gonna have to kind of live with that this season, I think, at this point, unless we have some magical signing in January that gets bedded in and walks into the team and adapts right away. So I think that's not that realistic. And then we're left with, geez, man, these 2 wingers, we hope they don't get hurt or we have to rotate them. So who are we going to rotate in? Do you want a Yang Palma combo at Ross County in January?
Oh my God! Don't.
These are the kind of things that we've got to start thinking about, because they're going to happen. Like, we can't flog these guys for 13 games and 41 days. There's going to have to be rotation. And that's why, I'm very comfortable with all this, because we have an 11-point lead over Rangers. I forget what it is over Aberdeen. I don't feel that guilty about it, because I didn't think it was a serious contest with Aberdeen. So I don't even know what the gap is with Aberdeen, because I haven't really been concerned about them. But yeah, at 11 points, we've got, a pretty big cushion for some bad variance, bad luck through this month and a half that we're going to go through if things kind of break against us. But yeah, it's going to take a yeoman's amount of work of all involved to get through the period, and hopefully this purple patch of lack of injuries is because of cause. It's because of strategy and care and being smart with decision making rather than just luck. Because if that reverses, we, like all teams, we're going to be vulnerable given the fixture list.
Yeah, Alan, just to clarify, by the way, that's a 9-point lead over Aberdeen and an 11-point lead over Rangers. So
sorry,
it's,
Aberdeen. Sorry, Gavin.
Yeah. It's much of a muchness between the pair of them. It's a result either way, and it changes things. But Alan, I guess I'll come to you to ask, some of the nightmare scenarios that James suggested there of a winged pairing of Palma and Yang. What are the chances of these players, stepping up to the plate, do you think, over this period of time when they really will be necessary to get us through this period? Is there any realistic hope that they're going to massively improve? Is Marco Tilio going to suddenly realise how in love he is with Celtic and come flying over from Australia and say, "Don't worry, mate, I'll save you"? Where do we find ourselves here?
So listen, I'm conscious that we're straying into the territory of. I can just see all the comments now. Oh, you're all so negative. We won the cup. Blah blah blah. Right. So let's just. So this was a game, right, where hopefully I'd signposted for weeks to come. It was going to be a very, very tight game. If we'd been playing Hearts or Kilmarnock, it would have been a really tight game because it's a cup final and the opposition are going to play their little hearts out, or when Celtic hopefully are going to play their little hearts out. And you add in the wind and the rain and all that, and it's going to be and a slippy pitch, and it's going to be a tight game, right? And it was, right? And we got on the right side of it, and that's to be celebrated, because cup finals are tricky. Cup finals, you do not get given a cup final. There is no way that Celtic were just going to walk up and stroll that game. None of the games against Clermont's side or even Beale's side, bar one or two games, they've all been by one goal if you look back over the last 2-3 years, right? So it was, and the XG differential is generally within one, right, either side, and it was, again, the XGs were almost identical at the end of 90 minutes, by the way, end of 120 minutes sort of thing. So this was a coin flip game, and that is not unusual for a cup final. What James and I are, I'm sorry, I don't speak for James, but what I'm certainly more concerned about isn't the per se, they stepped up and came up with a good defensive plan on the day, because you'd have to be an idiot to watch Celtic and not come up with a similar plan, quite frankly. And it's not the fact that Celtic had to win on penalties and gave away some daft goals and seemed to struggle to break down this defence at times. That's not the issue for me. It's the team was stressed, and when it was stressed, the risks that we've been talking about all season manifest themselves as poor performance. That's the issue, right? It's not that we won the cup or didn't win it in this playing sparkling football. I accept all that. That's just football, and I'm absolutely delighted that we won. I don't care that it's on penalties, and we won't remember it when we're totting up at the end of the season, right? It's more a reflection, because what we try and do here, it's not just a tactical talking about this one game, it's thinking about Celtic thinking strategically, how are we recruiting? What is the team trying to do with the ball? What's it trying to do without the ball? Do the changes make sense? Do the players in those positions make sense? That's what we're thinking about, and thinking about it not just on one game basis, but on a go forward basis, on a strategic basis. And how does it stress in Europe? How does it stress in the big games? Right? So not wanting to sound negative, but that's the kind of perspective that we're trying to give to this, or certainly, I think James is probably the same. He's nodding, so I think he's agreeing with me. So, yeah. So absolutely delighted. This is going to be the week's going to be a blast, right? Going to try and get as much happy content out there as possible. Have as much fun with it as we possibly can, but we can't ignore what we're seeing with our eyes in terms of things to be concerned about, because that's kind of our brand, isn't it? Really. So that makes, hopefully that makes, speaking to you, Laura, as a sort of, I don't want to call you a newbie. That's not fair, but you know what I mean. Almost talking to you as the kind of Celtic fan.
The everyman. You can say it. The everyman.
Yeah, exactly. The every woman, the every person. Yeah. Let me dig a hole here. Let me keep digging in that hole. Right. Yeah. You know what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I just think I personally panicked a little bit when I started scrolling down to look at the fixtures list and realised that, either we'll ride the crest of a wave and we will just, confidence will take us through, or it all goes to shit basically very, very quickly, and I can't decide which way it's going to go.
I'd be surprised if it's the latter, meaning that we're not talking calamity here. It's more so, for God's sakes, we haven't lost yet. Domestically, right? So it's
we won a trophy. All the targets have been met so far this season, I would argue. Pretty much.
Exactly. It's just and as Alan was saying, in the world we live in, I see, if you're at all a competent young boys manager coming to Celtic Park, and they do have the athletes at Young Boys. They've been defending atrociously this season from what I've looked at. But if somehow they come up with a smart game plan coming to Celtic Park, they've got the people that are going to give our midfield trouble if they man mark them, and they're compact and they're narrow. If they take this blueprint that teams are now deploying against us, and they have the athletes at fullback, by the way, that are going to give more of trouble for Maeda and Kuhn, generally speaking, than what Rangers do. The combination of size and speed, and the positional discipline is still, I haven't looked at them close enough, but given their defensive record, one would think that it's probably not great. But that's when we start thinking about, okay, what could go wrong? If we lose the Young Boys at home, all of a sudden this entire season changes. It's still theoretically. We go from people thinking, "Oh, well, top 8 possible, woo, to, oh my God, we might not even get into the 24 theoretically." It's possible. It's possible if we lose the Young Boys. So we have to think about, well, what could that theoretically look like? It shouldn't happen. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'd also don't want to underestimate a Champions League team that won Switzerland last year, that now has a body of work of evidence for the last 6 weeks, and saying, gee, those guys actually had a little bit of success defending them this way. Maybe we should try something like this. And maybe there's a couple of managers in Scotland that aren't completely oblivious to what's going on, and they see the same thing and try to replicate it, to a degree. So it's not, Katie bar the doors. It's not disaster central. It's just thinking about, what could go wrong. And I think that's what the lessons to draw out of the cup final analytically, as Alan said, are some of the concerns that have been latent, that we've been talking about all season, really have started to manifest, and not manifest with one data point or one game. It's now becoming a pattern of a pattern. What was that, Alan? Pattern of something, but we'll move on to that next week.
Yeah. Lots of patterns. That's what we like. We like patterns.
We do like patterns. The situation right now is, positives are we have a trophy in the cabinet, we haven't lost, and I now know that at least for nearly the next 6 weeks I will be able to watch Celtic in some form or fashion every 72 hours on average, so that's great. The only worry is I can see a light at the end of the tunnel. I just don't know if it's a train coming in the other direction. That's the only issue. Why don't we finish on a positive, Alan? Obviously, we've got the festive period coming up. Things are going to be a little bit all over the place in terms of when games are, when timings are. What can people expect from the Huddle Breakdown over the festive period in terms of content?
Oh yeah, look, loads. So listen, before I go into that, sorry, just one last thing on the actual game. Then, so we didn't really talk about the penalties, which
we did not.
Amazing. That's another 5 out of 5. I mean, this is just incredible. In my lifetime, seeing Celtic, 2 penalty shootouts and scoring all 5 penalties really competently as well. Well, kind of Maida's kind of sort of bobbled into the corner sort of thing, but all the rest of them were really good. Just a quick bit on that then. So again, look at the data. That wasn't to be unexpected, right? So if you look at the relative goalkeepers in the shootout, according to Transfer Market, I know, right, there's a lot of health warning over some of the stuff on there, but Butland had saved 6 out of 42 penalties that he'd faced, which is a save rate or a success rate for the opposition of 86%, meaning he'd saved around just over 14%. That's pretty bad. That's really bad for a goalkeeper. So Butland, not good at penalties. And guess what? He dived the wrong way 4 out of 5 penalties. Schmeichel has saved 25 out of 116 penalties, which is around about 21.5%. So 78.5% penalties he doesn't save, which is bang average. So Schmeichel is competent, average at saving penalties, and he dived the right way 4 times out of 5 and saved 1. So we had the edge on the penalties, despite the fact that not only did we lose the toss for choice of end and had to sort of take them in front of the baying horde, but we lost the toss to take the first penalty. Now that is significant because if you're the team taking the first penalty, you've got a 22% higher chance based on historical probabilities, probability based on historical results. So take that, as you have it. 22% chance of winning if you're the team taking the first penalty is generally what historically has happened in these shootouts. So we overcame that in this case as well. So that was 2 bits of variance that went badly against Celtic. There was variance going both ways in the game. The potential penalty shout on their side, the Kyogo getting his studs to the ball and deflecting it in, the Raskin deflection for Taylor's goal, the Raskin back header for Maida's goal, and all that. So lots of variance floating about, but we were on the wrong side of it on the penalty shootout, but we still managed to overcome, so that's good. Anyway, sorry, back to the Huddle Breakdown then. So obviously this pod's going out, available to all. We'll have another blast on Thursday, probably deep diving into a few little bits and bobs a bit deeper. Look forward to the Dundee United game. We have got the usual round of articles, but we've also got some specials coming out. And I've kind of dropped a bit of a hint. If you look at my timeline on X or Blue Sky, you'll see I've dropped a fairly major hint as to what one of those specials could be, as it's already been recorded. And it is very special. I'm not being flippant here. We've managed to bag a world-renowned authority on statistics to talk to us, which is just amazing. And this guy is fantastic. So that'll be coming your way. And then there'll be a couple of specials that we're recording. One of them will be about the 67 final in Lisbon. And we're going to be doing the full mashings. And when I say the full mashings, I mean the stat pack. I mean a podcast discussing the game. Maybe might even have some special guests on that, and even a Yorkshire Whistler assessment of the big calls from Lisbon. Right, so that will be coming out over the festive period as well. So loads going on there. Pretty much most days we produce some content, whether it's written or a podcast. Sundays it's the Lord's Day. Obviously, we like to have some rest then. Mm-hmm. So if you want all of that content, please huddlebreakdown.com. Subscribe. It'd be great to have you along. The chat, the community on match day in the chat is vibrant. It's really good fun. We had a founders meeting, so founder members. We had a founders call. That was great. Where the founder members get a chance to do a bit of a Q&A, and that was lovely. And we're having another one before the end of the year as well. So loads and loads of things going on. But if you want to join in and be part of the community, please subscribe.
Absolutely, James. I think I'm going to do what I haven't done in my 36 years on this planet so far, and I'm going to indulge myself over the Christmas period and watch the full 90 minutes of that 1967 final, because I have never done it.
Oh, you must.
Really? I've done it a couple of times, and I have to do it a third time now in order to prepare for my job to perform with Alan here, because he's the one that's gone through and like analytically figured out which Italian dude is which Italian dude on a grainy black and white picture from 60 years ago or whatever it is, 55 years ago. So I got to do some serious homework so I can hold my own with Alan on this one. I
just want Alan to come out of it and say Bobby Murdoch is rubbish because he only completed 2 pack passes in 90 minutes. That is what I want.
Bobby Murdoch was something else. Because you couldn't tell if he was on the ball because he's two-footed, right? He was literally two-footed. So it's not like Bertie Auld, it's the left-footed dude, right? Murdoch was so two-footed, it was unbelievable. But the picture quality is so shit that most of the shots of the players in action are close-ups, because if they panned out, the quality was just a bit. It was like be watching through a sleet storm, right? So trying to see pack passes and the impact of them, you have to be from a distance because you can't see. Anyway, listen, I'm complaining. It was a nightmare, but it's a great game to watch.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to the breakdown of that one, I have to say. Alan, James, thank you very much for joining me. Everybody, I hope you enjoy listening. Please subscribe on our various platforms if you like what we do. We really do appreciate all your support, and we will see you again next week.